What are we talking about today, Morgan?
Today, we're talking about whether or not you can refuse to work weekends. I'm a six-figure freelancer, by the way. Quick introduction. I run multiple businesses, blog, and all that good stuff. Elena's my partner in crime.
We're talking about this because this is something that you've written about previously. So tell me about what you learned.
One day, I was Googling different trending topics, and I was noticing this question kept kind of coming up. Can I refuse to work weekends? And I thought it was really interesting because I didn't really know whether or not that was like primarily a freelancer thing or like a regular, job, regular career kind of question. So I just Googled the question myself to see what Google had to say about it. And it was hilarious, Elena, because the very top result on Google, it said, no, you cannot refuse to work weekends. And as a self-employed person, I was like, no, that's not true. What? It's a free country here in the United States. Like, you can refuse to work the weekends. And I thought that was kind of a silly answer. Well, long story short, after I wrote my blog article about it, I am actually now the result in Google. And now Google will tell you that you do have the right to refuse to work weekends. But there is one slight caveat. You could get fired.
Like you have the right to refuse, but your employer probably also has the right to fire you.
Ding, ding. In this video, we're going to be talking about ways to kind of get out of working weekends, kind of what your rights are, both as a traditional employee and a freelancer. And spoiler alert, it's way, 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 way easier to get out of working weekends if you are self-employed or a freelancer because you're basically setting your own boundaries in life. But like Elena said, spoiler alert, yes, your employer can fire you because it's a free country and it works both ways. If you're a job, like I've had those jobs in the past, like traditional employment, where they made me work basically every single weekend. And eventually I was like, you know what? I ain't gonna do that anymore. And I just quit and did something else. You have that right in this world, and especially in this super hot job market. We're filming this in 2022, August 2022. And like the job market couldn't be any hotter. If you've got like a pulse and you're breathing, you could probably go out and get like any job you wanted just about. With that disclaimer out of the way, that you have the right to refuse, but your employer or client even has the right to fire your butt. And I just wanted to say really quickly too, this is actually a topic that came up personally with me just yesterday, Elena, with one of a brand new client that I'm talking to, who I'm really excited to work with. I've never worked with before, big name, like starstruck kind of, but trying to play it cool. They were asking me for a quick turnaround. And normally I don't do like super quick turnarounds, anything less than like, 3 or 4 days, which is quick in my world. This person I really, really, really wanted to work with. So I was like, okay, I'll do like a 2 business day turnaround. And they're like, okay, cool. I'll send it to you on Friday and then you can have it back to us by Monday. And I was like, okay, so that's that means Saturday, Sunday. That's not a business day. And they were like, oh, do you work weekends? And I said, not if I can help it.
But how did they respond to that though when you told them that you said, you try to avoid it?
Actually, they said they really respected that. That was the word that they used. They said they really respected my honesty, and they said it made total sense to them. I really feel like honesty is the best policy overall. All right, so here are 6 hot tips on things that you can do both as a freelancer or a traditional employer to try to kind of wiggle your way out of working weekends. All right, number 1, ask questions and negotiate. I really find that in those kinds of situations, all you really have to do is kind of be like, hey, like the situation I was in last night, talking to this brand new client. I was like, well, when specifically do you need it? Can you get it to me a little bit earlier in the day on Friday? Is there any wiggle room in that timeline that we could use? Like, do you really need it Monday morning, or it can be Monday afternoon or Tuesday afternoon, or etc. And so I really kind of feel like, because sometimes people, especially in the freelance world, will sort of assume that us freelancers just work like 24/7. And sometimes in the traditional career world, they'll just assume that like, oh, you've got nothing going on Saturday, you're cool with it, right? So sometimes just a little bit of like healthy questioning and saying, hey, or how about I work this weekend, but I'm going to ask for a higher rate? Or how about I work this weekend, but not the next? Or you give me like one guaranteed weekend off a month, something like that. And I find, Elena, that no one's ever, well, I'm sure somebody's been fired, but most people will not get fired just for asking some questions and negotiating a little bit.
I wonder if part of that for freelancers is that some freelancers are doing this as a side hustle and they may have like a 9 to 5 job. So maybe it's possible. I think that some people could assume that maybe you're just by default working on weekends and nights.
I think a lot of people, freelance can has that like stigma where they all assume that this is our side gig, but it's our full-time gig for a lot of people. And we have to create boundaries in our life. Otherwise we'd be working 24/7.
Even more so when you're working, from home and you're working that freelance life full time because, it muddy the water really quickly if you don't set some boundaries.
Which brings us to point number 2, use an excuse. All right. So again, I think honesty is the best policy, but every once in a while, an excuse could be helpful. And here's why. I actually had to start using excuses during the pandemic. Forgive me. But when we first had our lockdowns, a lot of my clients kept saying, oh, well, since we're all just stuck inside anyway with nowhere to go and nothing else to do, I figured you could work on this report on Saturday. It's kind of hard, Elena, to be like, oh, I can't work weekends. I'm so busy.
This concert that I'm going, yeah, no, those don't exist
Yeah,
anymore.
I mean, there's like not a lot you can kind of do there. So here's a couple of different things you could do. If a client or a traditional employer springs this on you and it's not your norm, you just straight up tell them that you're out of town. In fact, that's not even an excuse for me. Sometimes a client asks me to work the weekend and I legitimately have other plans, or I leave. Like I love to do weekend trips or little road trips or have other plans on the weekend. So that's not at all unusual for me. Another excuse you can use is I have pre-existing obligations. That kind of rolls into the other excuse of I'm out of town. That works a little bit better. You have to really specify like where you're going or whatever. And again, whether this is traditional employment or freelance, you don't even have to tell them what those things that you're supposed to be doing are. It's none of your business. Number 3, and this is the one that I use most often now because I just think the honesty is the best policy. I don't work weekends, at least not for clients. I work weekends for my business and my blog, my own personal projects. Self-employed people have the biggest upper hand here because, we can set our own boundaries. You might not be able to have that same luxury if you're a traditional employer. All right, number 3, and this one is more for traditional employees. Use vacation time or sick leave. Now, I have done this a couple of times. Like I said, I had a traditional employee job for a long time where they made me work basically every single weekend. And so eventually I would kind of strategically start to use up a little bit of my vacation time. I did call in sick one time, play hooky, just one time ever. It was exhilarating, by the way, but it was, anyway, I'd recommend it, but it was super fun the one time I did it. Number 4, and this is again, a little bit more for traditional employment, but apply for a different position. And I guess in a way, this kind of applies to freelance too. Like if you, for some reason, have found yourself in a niche or with a specific client that's just constantly needing work on Saturdays, find another client or go find another job or just, find something that's not going to require that kind of time investment. Number 5, kind of in the lines of the last one, quit.
We don't recommend doing without a plan, as we've discussed before in a previous video.
Yeah, we'll link that one of the cards above, right? I never know where the cards are going to go, but we'll link it somewhere here. But I did eventually quit my last salary job, which is how I became self-employed in the first place, because I was like, this work weekend stuff's for the birds. I would actually recommend looking or asking around to see if there, especially if you're a traditional employee, to see if there's like a position similar to yours. It doesn't require the weekends or it has better hours, etc. Number 6, this is, I would say, probably for more employees and even freelancers, although it can apply to freelancers, is just seek legal advice. Now, I am not a lawyer, so big giant disclaimer right here, not a lawyer. All right, so don't be like contacting your company being like, oh, Morgan Overholt and YouTube said, but I will tell you, though, there are certain things and common labor law violations that certain employers might be guilty of doing. Like, so specifically, there are things like employer misclassification, failure to pay overtime wages, keeping inaccurate records with the Fair Labor Standards Law or Fair Labor Standards Act. The creation of a hostile work environment, or even discrimination. So let's say that you could prove, difficult to prove, but maybe you were working weekends when nobody else with your job title was because of sexual orientation, race, or on the basis of gender. So kind of do consider those things, consult your own legal expert on that. And of course, also the way this would apply to freelancers is if you have a specific contract with a client that has like certain parameters and your client is not upholding their end of the deal, the legal advice might come into play there as well. Closing thoughts on working the weekends.
I imagine somebody listening to this questioning, do you think like refusing to work weekends is almost a point of privilege to some? Because I feel like in the beginning of my career, I would definitely work a lot more weekends than I do more recently.
Everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be far easier for some than others. But in my other video where I talked about how I quit my job without a plan, and you maybe can too, but I don't recommend it. I did offer alternatives about what you could do if you're kind of stuck in a job or a situation that is not healthy, or you're working hours where you don't like, but you can't afford just to be like, see ya. What you could do is you could start to slowly transition. Do use a days off, whether it be Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever, to try to find other jobs. The easiest time to find a job is when you currently have one, or start to develop a little bit of a nest egg by taking on a side gig, when the afternoons for a little bit to try to work up like extra time or extra money rather. And I find a lot of times when you kind of like use those extra gigs to save a little bit of money, then it makes it a lot easier to sort of make those decisions and change jobs. Elaine and I have worked so many weekends in our lives. I mean, holy cow. Like, I still work weekends, but again, for my own company. I just don't do it for clients. To truly get ahead in this world, unfortunately, people, it takes a lot of hard work. So yeah, I would say it's definitely a point of privilege. And I would say for most of it, it's something that we have to work up to. But again, I just think that the original answer on the internet was so offensive to me personally, because the quick snippet answer on Google was, no, you cannot refuse to work weekends. And I'm like, okay, you can refuse, but you might have to give something up.
All right. I think that wraps us up, right?
For more, make sure you're following me on social media at Morgan O Media on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that good stuff. Make sure you like and subscribe here on YouTube as well. And we'll see you next time.
Whee!